Hi everybody, this is Matthew Poes of Poes Acoustics, and I'm going to so I did a review on the Juke Audio Plus for Audioholics. I'm going to do my own little review on it from the standpoint of integrators, and I know my channel has a whole wide range of people who watch it, but I thought that at least for integrators it'd be interesting. So I think one of the problems that we often face is that you want to be able to offer good value to clients. And the types of clients we often work with, and I have no problem sharing this with people that aren't in the integration world. I think it's important to understand how this works. We make partnerships with builders and contractors because often they're the ones who have access to you all who are clients. You're building a new house and you want multi-zone audio, as an example. You want Wi-Fi everywhere. Now, often the way this is presented is not that way. It's more like, well, yeah, we want to have Wi-Fi everywhere and we want to have music in different rooms. And you don't care how that happens. You just want it to happen and you want it to all work really well and be easy to use. On our end, what that builder needs to do is contact an integration company who can come in. And usually we have relationships, and this is how this happens. So you contact a integration company who then goes out and bids on the job and says, okay, well, we can put in I'm just going to make up Netgear, for instance. For the Wi-Fi, we'll put in access points. We think for this size house, we need 4. We're going to put a PoE switch and a router in. We're going to have a central area where all the equipment goes. So we've picked this closet here, and we're going to put that in. We're going to run the wires. That's going to be this amount of money. It's going to be, I don't know, I'm going to make numbers up here. It's going to be $1,000. And then you want to do this. And one of the problems you run into this being multi-zone audio, and so people say, well, I want it in the living room. I want it in the kitchen. I want it in the pool deck area. I want it in the bathroom. And I want it in the kids' room, maybe, I don't know. And you end up, let's just say you end up with 6 zones, right? So the problem you run into then to offer this to the clients is that, well, you need to get a 12-channel amplifier that can be set up in 6 zones. You need a matrix. You need ability to control the system and sources. So let's just set aside Sonos and Blue Sound and all those devices for a minute. The typical cost using the kinds of equipment we use from pretty, like, I'm going to call them kind of lower end brands, would still probably make that cost somewhere between $5,000 and $8,000, which probably sounds absurd to those of you outside of the integration world. But when you look at the cost of those amplifiers, which are like at least $1,500 to $2,000, often don't include the matrix at that price point. So you have to go to a higher price point to get the matrix, or get a separate matrix that you add on to it. So that adds in money. I think the one I have, I'd have to look it up, but I think it's an episode amp with DSP. I think it's at least $2,000 or $3,000. It does have a matrix on the input. You still have to control it. So that doesn't have any controllability without so you need a Control 4 system. So you're probably looking at least $1,000 to $2,000 for a Control 4 system that's programmed to control that. You need sources. In my case, I use the Control 4 system as my source. You could do that for a client. That does have some limitations, but there's an audio bridge you can use, and it gives you, I think it's Tidal and Amazon Music and AirPlay 1, which I really don't like. Control 4, if you're listening, please add AirPlay 2 instead of it. It would make it a much better device. So their device overall is a good device. Like, the controller is really clean. It has good outputs. It isn't really optimized for this, but it's usable. It's got optical outputs, HDMI, which can be used as a zone in the audio, and it's got our line outputs, which can go to RCA. So then you've got speakers. So, I mean, just modest quality speakers can cost $300-400 for a pair. Every zone is going to need at least 1 pair. Some zones may need 2 pairs to give proper coverage. You still have basically no bass with a setup like this. So what I've just described is something that's got background music quality to it. So if you really want to add more full range, you got to add a subwoofer. So you're looking at probably $1,000 to $2,000 for, like, I mean, $1,000 would be like a cheap, pretty low end subwoofer. $2,000, so the SVS subwoofer I reviewed relatively recently, I believe, was $2,000. Not a bad option, actually, for these multi-zone type systems. Gives you bass down to about 20 hertz in most rooms with decent output for multi-zone audio. For a home theater, I, in my review, had pointed out it's not really going to work, but actually I think a lot of people would find it to be adequate anyway, at least with 2 of them. So that gets pretty expensive quick. But that's what it costs, and that would be a pretty good setup. So what do you do for the person who says, well, can I just buy some Sonos speakers and throw them around? So we as integrators just say, sure. And, you can get a bunch of Sonos speakers, mount them on the wall, do the wiring for them, and it actually sounds decent. They're not bad speakers at all. They're well engineered. And the app is great, works really well, and it gets the job done. But it's not that integrated. You got speakers that are visible in the room. So it'd be nice to offer somebody something a little better. So then Sonos and Bluesound and Hios and Musicast from Yamaha and all these different products actually offer a option that's really easy to implement. A DIYer can do it, an integration company can do it, and it's priced relatively well for what it is. But if you want to have in-ceiling speakers and try to keep everything hidden, you end up having to use their zone amps. And those zone amps range in price from anywhere from at the lowest end I've ever seen, about $500, to the highest end of that, about $1,500, $2,000 per zone. And they usually have line inputs and line outputs. They usually have digital inputs, and then they often and sometimes have digital outputs, but not usually. And then they usually have like a 50 to 80 watt 8 ohm amplifier, and it may or may not double that into 4 ohms. More often than not, they don't double it into 4 ohms. And so there are many of them, the one from Sonos and the one from Bluesound, which I have good experience with both, actually own the Bluesound one, are really decent amplifiers. And the circuitry is well designed and the apps are pretty good, not bad. And they're AirPlay 2, which I like. As I said, I'm a big fan of AirPlay 2. But what do you do when you need 6 zones, like this scenario I mentioned? Because that's already $6,000 potentially in just amplifiers, and we haven't even bought speakers. So we're right back up to that same price point we were at before with this other system I mentioned. And so then you end up looking at, there's just like a lot of really junky stuff that you can kludge together to do it for less money. But it's not great, and I've never been a huge fan. And again, from the standpoint of an integrator, I feel like you can't offer great value to the client with those situations. So what do you do for the builder who's got the client who basically comes in and is like, can I just sort of check a box and get something for $3,000 or $4,000 that does everything I need it to do? I really don't need this to be a really high-end, stupendous system. I need it to get the job done. And that's where the Juke Audio Juke Plus device comes in. It's 6 amplifier zones, 12 amplifiers, 50 watts into 8 ohms, 100 watts into 4 ohms. But it exceeds those numbers, especially into 8 ohms, by a lot. I actually measured over 75 watts into 8 ohms. I measured only a little over 100 into 4 ohms, but I believe from what they told me, their own testing, they got it up to about 150. The chip that's in it will do easily that. And the way I was testing it, I think it wouldn't shock me if it could do more. I was nervous to blow it because I've done that in the past when I've pushed something. I will also mention that in my testing, I had 2 zones going, so 4 amplifiers, because I wanted to make sure it could do these power ratings with multiple zones. So it did 75 watts per channel with 4 channels going at the same time. Not bad. There are receivers that can't do that. It's got, for the outs, it doesn't have an analog out per zone. I wish it did. But it does have analog outputs that are its own zone, and you can combine them with other zones. So you could use that for subwoofers, or you could use that for like an outdoor amplifier system. And then it's got an optical output, same thing, it's its own zone. So you can combine it with the others, or you can make it its own thing. On the input side, you've got AirPlay 2 for every output. You've got Spotify Connect for every output. You've got Bluetooth for every output, it's Bluetooth 5. And then you've got a optical digital input, a Toslink input, and you've got an analog input. And unlike the old Juke, where the analog input was done with an add-on card that wasn't very good, this is built in, and while it's still not amazing, it's not bad. It's good enough that I think most people would be happy. And so the cool thing is that the Toslink input or the analog input either could be used for TV audio. So one of the things you could do is pipe audio in and have that go through your multi-zone system if you wanted to from the TV. And if you use like an Apple TV, which has AirPlay 2, you can actually have the Apple TV connect to this device instead of doing those other inputs, and that works as well. It's got a graphic equalizer, so there's some control over audio. I would like to see them add a PEQ, well, like let's say 3 bands per channel, and I would like to see them add tone controls. I know the graphic EQ is more refined than tone controls, but tone controls are shelf filters. And so again, in the integration world, one of the most basic things you can do to improve the sound of in-ceiling speakers is get the bass response to be more correct for what it should be. Most in-ceiling speakers don't have a great balance to them. And so a really simple fix is to add between 3 and 6 dB of boost below 100 hertz through a shelf filter. And that's what the bass knob typically is on a bass and treble control, a tone control. And it allows you to tune it and get it right for the client. As long as the speaker can handle it and you've got enough amplifier power, like I said, this is pretty potent, you get good performance out of it. Now, this can work through Wi-Fi, but it also can work, and I have been using it and testing it that way, but it also has an RJ45 connection for a direct input. It's got 2 USB inputs, which can be used for different things. And it's nice. It's only 1 rack unit high, which means it doesn't take up a lot of space. The fan cooling actually happens through the sides, so it goes in on one side, out the other, which again, I think is great for our situations we're often in with racks. The Bluetooth antenna is on the front here. That might be the Wi-Fi antenna as well. I don't remember now if that's true, but in either case, for those of you who, again, work in this world, you know why this is useful. When they're on the back, they often create problems for us, including they end up being inside a noisy rack environment instead of out in the front and away from all the wires. It's got a built-in power supply, so you're able to just run a power cord to it, makes things neater. Again, for those of you that work as integrators know when things have wall warts or other external power supplies, you've got to find a place to stick those things, and that can be a pain in the butt. So built-in power supplies are nice. It makes it easier to make the rack neat. It uses Phoenix connectors, so I'll show you the back of this. I've been talking about it, but not showing you. So it uses Phoenix connectors for the inputs, which I think are good. And actually, there's a company, I think it's called like Snap Connect or something like that, that has these Phoenix connectors. I actually just heard that they're going to redesign it and make them more compatible, but they actually make it easier than the screw kind. The ones that come with this are the standard screw kind. Not that big a deal. Most of us that do this know how to use those. And then here's the RCA and Toslink inputs I mentioned to you. So I think that for the price, $24.99 retail, this is a really good option to give value because it lets you take and offer somebody, as I said, it's 6+ zones. I mean, it's 6 zones plus more. You could even, so let's just say, and this is actually something I've done in my own house, it's something that works really well. Because it uses AirPlay 2, even if they're not an Apple house, you could give them an iPad as part of this deal. So you say, all right, we're going to give you a system. Here's your controller. And you have an iPad that's dedicated to this purpose. And then they've got all the apps for what they like on it. And they've got an Apple TV because making this Apple-centric happens to have some advantages. So what you do is AirPlay 2 then becomes your means of connecting things. The app that they now have for Juke actually lets you do this too. So you could do this through the app, but I find the AirPlay 2 method a little bit easier. You could have a receiver. Every receiver on the market that I know of today, for the most part, seems to have AirPlay 2. So I have a Sony 7000 ES receiver right now that's doing my family room system. Before that, I had a Pioneer receiver. They both have AirPlay 2. And the nice thing about them is you select it, and it turns the receiver on, automatically switches it over to AirPlay 2 is the source, and I can play music. On this one, those 6 outputs could be set to whatever. So I could have bedroom, outdoor, bathroom, kids room, whatever. I select whichever of those I want in the AirPlay selections. And then I've got some speakers that have AirPlay 2 built in there, like a kind of all-in-one powered speaker device. And so I can select those too. And those happen to be in my bedroom, but just pretend they're in different places. And you can adjust the volumes in there. And now everything just works together. And so you can offer people basically like a surround system in their family room that can be part of the multi-zone audio. You can offer the other multi-zone stuff, which is powered off of this, and then any of their AirPlay 2 speakers all become a part of the network as long as you label it all in a way that makes sense. And so I really like that this just becomes a way of adding on to stuff that you would typically throw into those systems. The old way of doing it, of having to run an input into the receiver for this purpose, just complicated everything, and it required a control system. Now, I have a control system, but the reality of everything I've just described to you is you don't actually need to use a control system for any of that to work. It will work without a control system. So it's a way of keeping costs down for those who don't want to get into that. And I understand those people who don't. I know a lot of people who don't like the control systems. They don't like the cost. They don't like the fact that they can't program it themselves. And they don't like the way they work. So I think there's real advantage to offering value. You can offer these better systems still built around this with higher quality stuff, better speakers. You can add in the control system and automation for the home if you want to. And then when you get those clients who are coming in and they're really at the lower price point and they don't want all that stuff that's going to end up costing tens of thousands of dollars, you can say, look, here's this, $24.99. We're going to throw in some good speakers. I happen to be a fan of CAF for in-wall speakers at lower price points. So offer some CAF speakers. maybe $500 a pair. They actually have some, I believe, that are cheaper than that. Certainly there's other good brands you could look at, but I'm just trying to make a scenario here. So you could be looking at like $5,500 for CAF, which is pretty good. Maybe make it $6,500 with a subwoofer of some kind, or a couple of subwoofers to give some of the zones a little bit more bass. I mean, this thing is actually powerful enough that some of those in-ceiling subs that CAF makes might be able to be paired in and work off of this and be decent. So point is, like, you could offer people something that really isn't bad at a pretty decent price point. And it's cheaper than the Sonos and Blue Sound and other type routes for the number of zones you get. You know, if somebody wants like 2 zones, yeah, actually, to be honest with you, 2 Sonos zones and speakers wouldn't be that far off from the price of this. And this gives you 6 zones plus 2 additional that could be used if you have additional amplification. So anyway, I think integrators should be looking at this. I think it's a good product. And for those of you who are thinking, well, but it's so cheap and we don't make as much money, I understand your issue, but you got to remember there's clients who want to be at that lower price point, and you got to offer something. And your answer is to say, because I don't want to sell something at this price point, you get nothing from me. And I would rather be able to offer something. And I think this offers something, including it gives them good upgrade routes in the future to come back to us and pick other equipment they like. Now, again, since I'm letting all the secrets out to consumers who are saying, well, why would an integrator not want to offer lower priced options? The answer is when things get to be too cheap and the margins get to be too small, if there's not something else being offered to go with it, you could actually lose money on the deal. A lot of integrators have everybody has overhead. I have a very small operation and I have overhead, but big integrators have much bigger overhead. And so what could happen is if you start doing, especially a lot of them, if you have like a builder who's giving you, I don't know, 100 of these jobs, and you haven't built it in such a way that there's enough margin, you could actually lose a ton of money because you may not make anything on the job, and labor is just a cost. For most of us, labor, what you pay after overhead is about what it costs. Like, we don't make money on labor. We make very little money on labor. And so if you're basically breaking even on labor, breaking even on the product after overhead because the cost is too low, ultimately you're going to either break even or lose money on these deals. So that's why some places won't offer this stuff and kind of put themselves in a position of saying, like, either you step up to this or we're out, go to Best Buy. But there are certainly shops, myself included, that can sell something like this with speakers and make enough money to be worth our while and still offer you a lot of value and a good product. So I really applaud Juke for doing this. I'd like to see them continue to offer new versions of this. I'd love to see a line level only version of this. I'd love to see one that has some additional features yet, like RCA outputs for subwoofers on every single output, things like that. But overall, I think they've done a good job. It's a solid product. It works well. You know, there's some refinements to the software that are needed. I had found some issues with the graphic equalizer that affected the frequency response that needed to be fixed, but they did fix almost all of it. There's one little issue they're going to work on, but it's minor. I listened to it and didn't find it to be audible. And other than that, I just think it's a good product. And I like the company. I think they're good people. I applaud what they're trying to do, and I want to see them succeed. So for those of you that do work in the industry who watch my videos, you know, if you've got different experiences with it, I'd love to hear it. But at least so far, I've had very positive experiences. The regular Juke, for those of you who used that and don't want to touch it because you didn't like that product, I liked the idea of that product, but I'm with you. It had some problems. It wasn't powerful enough for a lot of people's homes. Its analog input option really wasn't. It was kind of kludgy. It wasn't a great approach. And the IP interface was not the best option for a lot of clients. So I get it if that was your issue with it. But they've changed it now so that it's got an app. They've offered this device with more features, and that always was meant to be a low-price, entry-level way to get into multi-zone audio for background purposes. And if that's what you were trying to do, there was nothing wrong with that product. It was a good product. But for a lot of us, we were trying to offer more, and this offers more. And the price point, while higher, is still a good price for what it is. So I would urge you to take a look at this. I think it's a good option for clients. And I think you'll ultimately find that it allows you to offer really good value in a multi-zone system. So anyway, thanks for watching. I'll try to do more videos like this in the future when I have products that make sense like this. But in fact, maybe I should do one on like why I like AirPlay 2, because I get into fights with integration companies all the time over this. They don't seem to be as enamored with AirPlay 2 as I am. But as somebody who's used all the technology and I have a wife that's technology phobic, I really like AirPlay 2. I think that they've done a very good job with it. And I think that when you've got an Apple-centric environment, it's really easy to use. So it's a product that I guess a protocol that I support, and I like products that use it. My understanding is Android has something similar. I don't know if it works quite as well for multi-zone or even has the multi-zone capabilities. There is Spotify and there's Tidal Connect as well that do have abilities like that, but they're not available in a lot of products. And with Spotify Connect and Tidal Connect, you're stuck with Spotify or Tidal. I don't use or like Spotify. I do use Tidal, but I actually listen to Apple Music way more. And then my wife actually likes to listen to music on YouTube. So like, what good are those for her? So AirPlay 2 is agnostic. I can use any source I want that I get an app for on my phone or my tablet. All right. So gone on long enough. Again, thanks for watching. Hopefully this video was helpful.